In this episode of Drinks Around the Table, part one of our two-part episode where I sit down with artist Tony McMillen. We talk shop about his starting out as an indie artist, focusing on his prose work and early comics. Hope you enjoy. The beginning of Stranger Things, where they're playing D&D in the basement, or also D&D centric on ET when they're riffing, playing the game, and then right before the mom loses it about the dad.
Right.
Like that was my childhood in the 80s, and just reading your work, it's like, oh my god, like if this dude didn't have a similar childhood, he would have fit right in with my childhood.
Yeah, I think that's pretty widespread. You know, the Amblin kids. I mean, those movies worked for a reason. I mean, it's funny. I literally think you were probably Elliot's big brother and I was Elliot. Like that's exactly what we were right there. Like I would be watching my sister hang out with people and doing some stuff I wish I could do. And you know, I caught up in a couple of years. But yeah, all that stuff speaks to me big time. And you know, my book Serious Creatures, obviously, hugely indebted to early 80s, especially all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's funny watching those movies now. I grew up on them. I love them. They're such comfort food. Like I just
100%.
eat it up. Yeah. And even watching like parents smoking around their kids, which I did hate as a kid, but I was like, yeah, that's what it's all about. Secondhand smoke.
Right? The freedom. Car windows rolled up.
Oh yeah. I was telling somebody else recently, like my mom didn't make us wear like seatbelts, and she got into a few car accidents and like lost all her teeth one time, but she was like, nah, no big deal. Yeah, she told me this one story. Her mom actually had dentures early on, and she's like, yeah, I got a car accident, woke up, and I saw my teeth embedded in the wheel.
Jesus.
And I was like, that's crazy, Mom, but no seatbelts, right? She's like, no. Like, cool.
I have a similar story with my grandpa. So this was like back in the day. This is the 40s. He had his feet up on the dash in the passenger seat. They hit something. He went through the windshield feet first, but evidently was enough, like not enough speed that he couldn't keep his balance. So he went over the hood, landed, ran to keep up. People thought he was fleeing the crime scene. And he's like, no, I was trying not to die. And same thing. It was like, well, if you're in the front, you should wear the seatbelt, but don't in the back. Don't, you know, in the big bouncing around.
I'm picturing Liu Kang from Mortal Kombat just doing his thing like across the screen. That's phenomenal. I'm glad your grandpa's fine, but I would live to see that. Just witness a guy just like landed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and clearly this is back in the day before the glass got a little tougher to bust.
Sure.
But yeah, it is wild. All right, so I have a lot of shop. So I mean, if this ends up being a situation where this is like episode 1 of 3, 2, 3, that's if you got the time, I can make that work.
Yeah.
But all right, so you write, you draw comics, novels. What was your first artistic love?
You know, I actually think it's probably movies. I've liked comics really early on, but I think movies are before that. Yeah, and it's funny. I play guitar and I sing and stuff like that. But I actually was not into music until a little bit later in life for some reason.
Really?
So,
okay.
Yeah, and especially rock and roll. I was like, rock and roll is so annoying. And now I'm like, I love rock and roll. But yeah, I think movies are the first thing. When I was a little kid, my mom used to say he wants to be the next Spielberg.
Yeah. And
that was kind of true until I realized movies take a lot of other people, and it's really hard to work with a lot of other people, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But yeah, looking at your work, that makes sense too. Like you have a very, particularly your comics, but even your prose, like you have a cinematic approach to the art, the various arts that I've seen of yours.
Yeah, thanks. I think I do, and I think actually it took a while. Like my first published novel, Nefarious Twit, I still think that's the one thing I might George Lucas someday and redo it, because it feels like a screenplay that was retrofitted into a novel. And I learned since then, like, you know, you can't really do that and make a successful work. I think you got to really understand the medium you're using. And so there's definitely parts where I'm like, why'd I include like needle drops in a novel? This doesn't feel literary enough for me. And that's fine. It literally was like the first thing I ever wrote and tried to finish was a screenplay, and this is like, the eighth version of that. So it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I still Serious Creatures, my comic book about special effects. I mean, I love movies. Like it's fun to do movies within comic books and stuff like that. And movies are such an immediate thing. It's easy especially for a child, to just you put on a movie. You don't have. It's easy to understand. You just watch the story.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's makes, like I said, that makes total sense. What okay, so what was you tried screenplay first. What was your first published work?
Yeah, I think I had a couple short stories like published online, and I think it's legit. Like there was a contest. I got $100 once for some short story, which I don't remember what it's called. It must have been a masterpiece. But what's funny, so that was. But the first thing I actually got published, self-published, was my book Nefarious Twit. I did a Kickstarter for it, and that was a long time coming. It took me like 6 years to finish it, and a lot of that was just really not having the discipline to really sit down and figure it out. Yeah. And I'm thinking pretty good now. I'm fairly prolific, but before that, I was in bands. I wrote a lot of lyrics, and I was always trying to figure out how to write a novel. And I wrote a novel before that, which was finished, but it wasn't good enough to publish. And I'm glad I didn't publish that one. But it was called The Grudge, and it was basically about this kid who works he's a dishwasher at a psycho ward, and an inmate there says that he was behind the JFK assassination, and he did it with John Lennon of the Beatles.
Wow.
And it was this huge coup for world peace, and like it went haywire. And I didn't publish it, but so that was the first thing. I got Nefarious Twit published, and it was a novel, and I was really happy to kind of finally get started. I think it was 30 when I finally got that published. And it was like 6 years to finish, and I wrote some more novels, and Nefarious Twit's got illustrations in it, and I've always loved the draw, but I kind of didn't think it's that sort of thing I think a lot of people have where my taste, I thought my taste exceeds my ability. So I was like, the comics I can create, they suck compared to what I would read. And so that hindered me. I was really afraid, like, I can't put out this work, it's crap. I want to get better. And eventually, a couple years after Nefarious Twit, I hit a point where I was like, well, I have gotten a little bit better, and I'm drawing every day, and I'm really enjoying it. I think it's time just to bite the bullet. And it won't be perfect, but it will be me, and hopefully I'll keep learning on the job. And I haven't looked back since. I'm really happy I did.
Yeah, no.
That was Lumen. That was the first comic book I really fully did was Lumen. And yeah, I liked that book a lot. I still go back and, oh my God, I would totally draw this totally different. And that's fine. It's just, that's the way.
Yeah, it comes with the territory.
Yeah.
As you keep working.
Yeah, even if I finish issue now, I'll look back in a couple of months and go, oh man, why did I do that? And that's fine. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. No, I get that. That's what, my whole story with Jan the Vagabond, that spun out of me wanting to learn to draw at a late age. Like I was in my 40s,
right,
mid 40s, and I wanted to get to a point, like you said, like where I had a vision of what I wanted to do, but I knew I couldn't do it. And it was finally like Daniel Moeller, it was guys like that were like, and my wife, who were like, just shut up and make a comic already if you want to do it. Like quit comparing yourself. So no, I get that headspace where you just finally bite that bullet.
And I think it's for you probably the same. It's so liberating, even because it's not perfect, but it's yours, and it's
exactly.
It's like the first step on wherever you want to go. And to me, it was like, oh, thank God I'm finally doing this. I felt like it's like to be really grandiose. I thought it was like the call to action for a hero's quest.
Right.
I denied it for like my whole life. Like, no, I can't draw a comic. Eventually, I was like, oh, this fits really good. I really like making comic books. I love comic books. Why didn't I make this a comic book?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and I lament all the time. It's like, okay, now that I'm in my mid to late 40s, why couldn't I have had this revelation back in my 20s where I was just partying? I wasn't doing, like, I could have took all that energy I had and applied it to this.
I've thought about that a lot too, and sometimes I do regret it, but I'm also like, the partying, I partied and I had a lot of experiences, but I think that was good, especially for the writer side of me, to be like, I've had a life. I have a life. I've loved, I lost, I've done all that stuff. It's good that maybe I might be better technically at drawing comics if I started when I was 24 and start publishing, but I might not have had as many experiences in life because it sucks up your time. There's no getting around that.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, not that I have a time machine, but it's worked out.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Maybe I wish I would have started 5 years earlier. Just give me a little bit more.
Just a touch, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I mean, all that's fuel. So without the fuel, like even if you had the talent, yeah, 100%. I mean, it you can't have it both ways. But yeah, there are times where it's like, damn it. All right, so then what decides what format you're going to tell a story in?
Yeah, I think what really helped me there was my second novel, An Augmented Fourth, which is published by Word Horde. So basically, I had an editor I was having go through another version of Nefarious Twit, and he was named Garrett Cook. He's a great guy, and Garrett was like, "Hey, I might be able to be like an editor in chief for like a small imprint of. I'm looking for like shorter horror novels and novellas. You got anything?" And I didn't. I had like a vague idea of like, I want to do like Black Sabbath meets The Thing. And that's kind of all I had. I like lied, like I got something. It's like almost done. And so I think I got to figure this out. And I already knew at that point. I was like, okay, Nefarious Twit. It felt a little screenplay. Like I want to avoid that. And I realized the obvious thing was like, okay, make whatever story you're gonna do, make the medium you choose. Make it the best medium that could make that story the best it could be. Make it sing. And so I realized, okay, what can make would this story be better as a movie or a comic book? I was still thinking about comics. And I was like, no, actually, if I do it in the first person mode, and the character's he's got a really interesting voice. He's a Brummie. He's a grizzled rock star. I was like, I start writing just to practice his voice, and it was like being an actor. And I realized, oh, if I do this the whole book, it needs to be a novel because that's what sustains the story, what propels it. And then I realized this makes this much better than my first book, at least for me. And so I wrote it really quick. I really enjoyed that. And learning that is when I started thinking about Lumen, I was like, oh man, I can't just do a novel with a few illustrations. Like half the cool part of this is cool little armor and like the creatures, the mushroom monsters, and it's a night world, a world of endless night. Like it's gonna be visual.
Right.
And I started thinking about like, at the time, I was really getting into Cobra by Michel Fiffe, and I still my favorite comic book probably. And I was like, oh man, I just felt really like galvanized looking at his work. I'm like, oh man, you could do so much of comics I didn't think about. And I was like, I felt there's a lot of possibilities. So I realized, okay, so Augmented Fourth, that story needs to be a novel. This Lumen thing needs to be a comic. And I was like, that's the key I've not been understanding for this whole time. It's like, if I have a story, just think about all the avenues you could do, and pick the one that best suits the story, that really makes the story shine, not the thing that you really want it to be. Don't try to shove a circle in a square hole. It just even if you do it, it's gonna mutilate the thing in your hand.
Right.
And it took me decades to figure it out because I am quite slow, but I did, and I love it. I love that. That's kind of how I do things now. And I been kind of on a comic kick lately, but I imagine there'll be another prose novel. And I have a nonfiction book idea, which might have illustrations, but it will be a book. And I think there's, and who knows, maybe someday I will do some like super independent movie, but that's, who knows.
Yeah. No, that's cool. All right. So prose is my first love. So I want to start there. And we've touched on a lot already. So Nefarious Twit and An Augmented Fourth I have not read. I know of them, but I didn't know what. So I came to your work. Actually, the first thing I came to was the Wizard preview, the little bit there, and then I was digging on that, and it was Jaws that spoke to me because that's my all-time favorite movie. And so the Jaws throwback, or at the time I didn't know what it was. I just knew it had to do with Jaws. I didn't have all the context. And then, speaking of Daniel Moeller, he was like, check out Lumen. So I checked out Lumen. And then it was around the time, I don't know if it's when it dropped, but I saw it then, was your Bleeding Trees trilogy.
Right.
And so that's what I got. And my intent was, my to be read pile is ridiculous, but I bumped it up. I bumped the trilogy up. I was like, I want to read it before he comes on the show, to be able to talk about it more topically. Dude, I couldn't, and it's not that I could, it's not a fast read, and it's not, and I mean that in the best way, because like you have in your blurb that this is like Mark Twain meets Dark Tower, and I can see that actually. But it actually has. I'm a massive Beat Poet fan, and it's you are Kerouac-esque in so many of your lines. Like I couldn't burn through. I'm a very fast reader, and I couldn't do it. I kept getting tripped up of like, this is beautifully structured paragraph. Like this is insane that this much work went into this paragraph. That's not seemingly like, for all I know, you're just like, nah, I beat that out in like the weekend. But it seemed like so much work put it, like passion and technique put into these paragraphs that I can't burn through it. Like I didn't even make it through the first book of the trilogy yet.
High praise indeed. No, I understand what you're saying. No, that's one of the reasons why I made those novels. Again, it was like the way Mal Leatherberry, the main character, speaks, and it is kind of beat poetry. There's a little bit of Soft Machine Burroughs in there. There's a little Clockwork Orange in there, and there's the Mark Twain.
Nice, yeah.
That whole weird kind of delivery I fell really in love with, and I was like, oh, I want that to be the main focus of the book in some ways. I think it's a good way to tell the story, to make this a different kind of fantasy epic kind of thing. And so that's why it became that. And it's funny, like, you know, I'm really proud of those books. I kind of just released them and let them be.
Right.
I kind of feel like if I get bigger, I get a bigger audience, that maybe someday that will be like the people like the diehards, like, no, you got to read the Bleeding Tree trilogy. That's the shit. That's the one. It's like the secret one that people kind of don't know about. But
right.
And it's funny, like, so I will say, as I think I can be somewhat objective, I think Augmented Fourth is an easier, more accessible read. It's a funny read. It's kind of like the guy's vibe, the Codger Burton, the main character. It's almost a Spinal Tap thing, but then there's like cosmic horror, and it's more or less like a good time. It's a nice short read. And the Bleeding Tree trilogy is a little bit more of a full course meal with some weird textures in your mouth you might not be sure if you like, but you know that. No,
I completely like it. Don't let any of that, like me not burning through it, suggest to anybody listening that I don't dig it. I completely dig it. That's probably the problem. That's why it's so slow. Is I'm going back and rereading. Like I'm taking in the scene, because a lot of it, like Mal thinks the way she speaks, so it's very that beat poet vibe is there, and so I'll take the scene in, and then I go back and I'm like, then I get into the technicality of like, this is structured so dopely, like that. And I mean, not completely fawn all over you out the gate, but I dig it. Like I said, I had wanted to be able to say, hey, I liked this part and this part and this was dope. And right now, like the writing is the thing that not only hung me up, but that's the thing I love the most about it.
Honestly, 100%. I thank you so much for saying that. I love those books, and like I said, they're kind of like, I think there's plenty of people who've read all my comics who might not even know about these books, and that's totally cool. But I'm like, and it's funny. Those books eventually sort of they do Dark Tower in a way they kind of connect all my works. And it's like you don't have to read all my works to appreciate them, but there's like cool little bits for everybody who's like, oh, it's a little lumen here, a little this and that.
Nice.
And that was really fun to do. But like, yeah, I wrote those books. I started those before Nefarious Twit. Technically, I started those, some embryonic version of those, so long ago, and to finally finish them was this huge. I don't know, not cathartic exactly, but I just felt like, you know, when Spider-Man lifts off the giant huge thing that the octopus puts on him in the water and everything, I was like, I'm free, I did it.
Right.
And in a smaller way but similar, I'm like 10 pages away from finishing Serious Creatures, and if Mount Everest was Higher Comes the Fire, Bleeding Trilogy, this is like the next biggest mountain, and so it feels good to finally, like, this is the complete work. It's been years in the work in the making, and it's almost there.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah. I mean, with those big projects, that's entirely how it feels. Like, okay, not necessarily that a burden's been lifted, but this heavy thing I was holding, I can now put down and move on to other things. So no, I get that. What incidentally, and we will definitely get into Serious Creatures, but what if it weren't for Serious Creatures at this point, because I believe I've read all your comic work that you've got out, the Disprose trilogy, like the Mal Leatherberry trilogy, even not even having finished the first book of the trilogy would be the thing that I would be like, no, you got to check this out. Like this, but Serious Creatures. We'll get into Serious Creatures, like I said, but that has taken the cake for me. How long did it take for the Bleeding Trees trilogy? Like, I know I get that it was, percolating and worked on in the background maybe, but
I will say, okay, so it was percolating for a long time. So even like for Nefarious Twit, so I was age 24, really starting to kind of. I had the name Mal Leatherberry. I had some of the ideas, but thank you. It's actually I was a video clerk, and there's a guy whose last name was Leatherberry, and he's not client, he's a customer.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, is this your real name? He's like, yeah. I was like, I just want to rent fucking The Matrix or whatever. Like, okay, just cool. I've never seen that before.
Right.
But really writing it, I think a little bit after Nefarious Twit was published. That's when I say this became the Bleeding Tree trilogy, and that's when I went into earnest. So I think, I don't know, 8 years, and that's not working. I did Lumen, I did Serious Creatures the first half, did all these things, but that was like I kept going back to different drafts, and in doing Augmented Fourth, I was like, okay, so if I could do a really cool voice and a way of speaking for the main character, that can make this novel really go into like the right gear for me to get into it. And that's when I went to that draft, and all of a sudden this thing started working. And because before I kind of kept getting the same, like I got to like 120 pages as the story, I was like, it's not right yet. I don't know what's wrong. It's like out of tune or something. And then I changed the Mal Leatherberry speaking directly to the reader, and it just kept on coming and coming and coming. And then it was like, oh god, it's done. All 3 books are done. And I was like, I can't believe it. It was great. And I had to edit it and all that crap, but
sure. That was going to be my next question, is did you write all 3 at once? Because you published them all 3 at once, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, like halfway through, I was still considering like just one humongous book, like friggin' Bible. And then I realized, well, the actual way the stories work, there is like there's nice points, three different points where the story could stop for a second and give you a breather. And I was like, also with the way the language isn't like the most easy thing to just kind of jump into, I was like, it might be nice to have a little pause. I actually think it works better. And also, and this is a really tactile thing, I hate having humongous books on like the public transportation or on to the beach. Like, I remember I got from the library, I got this huge like Bendis Avengers friggin' it's like this whole run or something. I got from the library. I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. I did read it, but I had to read it at night in my bed because I couldn't lug it around. It's just too cumbersome.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to do that. I think if you gotta split into 2 books, like this, it's just too much book. Right. So I was like, 3 books is the way to go.
I've also come full circle. Like, I went from wanting the big omnibus and like just because it looked so dope on the shelf.
Right.
But now I've come back around to like, dude, just give me the mass market paperback, like just the little book. I'm good. Well, and I'm curious how many words actually instead of pages in this trilogy, because these are single spaced. So this is a lot.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact count. When I paid an editor to copy line edited, I had the count, but it's pretty dense. It's a pretty big story. There's a lot going on, and like one of these days I might do new versions. I like to think of kind of novel ways to put illustrations in the books. And so like Nefarious Twit, it's about a guy who's a children's book author, like a Shel Silverstein. So my drawings are his book illustrations.
Okay.
And Augmented Fourth is about a fictional band, so these are illustrations from the band's albums.
Nice.
But with Mal Leatherberry and Higher Crimes of Fire and stuff, I was like, I don't really have my in yet. I could do like album covers of hers, but that's the same thing as Augmented Fourth. So because like the one thing that's a great power of a novel of prose is that I don't show you what someone looks like. You can picture them however you like. So yeah. I don't want to ruin that with just like, oh, this is Mal doing this, and this is them doing that. This is Buck Caleb, the bad guy. I kind of want you to have that in your mind.
Creepy ass villain, by the way. Sorry to interject, but
no, he gets even weirder. Like the books, you'll see. It's funny. He's one of my favorite characters I've ever done, and he's definitely he's an easy villain, but it was really fun to write. No, this is a bad person, and this is really like freeing in a way to write something that
what's wild was, so like we've been talking about with Mal's voice and the fact that it's her perspective and all that beautiful language, the scene that I can talk about, because I'm about halfway through the first book,
right?
But like with 3 books, I started reading them 3 weeks ago. I should have burned through them in that first week. But part of it is, yeah, I'm caught up in the language of it. But when she's having the, I forget what you refer to it as, but basically where she's seeing what he's doing.
Right.
She's in her dark space or
the shadow. Yeah.
That it shifts a little bit because it's him talking. He does not speak like she does. And so, but that whole scene where he's got the girl's mom and he's like, get the record player, and like, even though it's like he's this affable dude and she's embarrassed that he's there and caught her, but like it's she's not realized what the reader does with the atmosphere. Right. Like, you're fucked. This is not going to end well for you. And watching it all, like, there's nothing, you know, you're the reader, you can't do anything, you're just watching this train wreck happen. And like, that was odd. Like, I can't wait to get more into his situation, like them coming together. But anyway,
okay, no, thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right. I love that, writing that scene. That was one of those pivotal scenes. Like, I gotta get this one right. This is like the introduction to Buck. This is how the shadow thing works. This is, you know, I was definitely thinking of Inglourious Bastards, the beginning. Yeah. You know, like that's one of those really suspenseful scenes where you're like, oh my god, it keeps going back and forth, and like they're at this dinner table, just drinking milk, and it's so like tense. You know, somebody's gonna screw up. When's it gonna happen? Hurry up and happen already. Yeah. Right. All right. So Lumen, was Lumen your first? So I did. Comic? It's the first comic I drew and wrote and did everything. But before that, I did a book called Oblivion Suite with an artist named Catalina Rufin, and we created it together. And I wrote the words, and they did the illustration, and that was really fun. And that's sort of like Catalina loves prog rock and loves rock, and Catalina is way younger than I am, but they know more about rock and prog rock than I do. And I thought I was like some super aficionado and that stuff, and so we did our love letter to Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett and that whole saga, and it's a pretty cool book. I still have some at my shop. It was a big learning experience, I think, for both of us, especially for me. I realized, coming from prose, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so many words. This is too many words. And they were like, Catalina was really kind, big. Hey, I think it'd be a good idea if we cut out this paragraph. I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea. You're right. And so that was a huge boon to me as a comic creator later on, to be like, okay, don't do that. Learn from this. They were right. I was wrong. Right. Great. Yeah. No, I had to learn the same. Yeah, I think everyone kind of does. Pros, especially. I think exactly. Yeah. It was. No, sorry. Go ahead. No, you please. I had to learn that you can't do, like, it's a stayed image. You can't do. I can't make everything you're describing happen in this one panel. It's not a movie. It's one image. Yeah, it actually made me realize, finally making a comic book, like how I've read comics a bunch, but there are parts of them I didn't actually even understand what I was reading that made it work. Right. And doing it, I was like, oh, that's why this page from Frank Miller is successful, and that's why this page from this person is not successful, or whatever. It's like, oh, this worked. It's just great. It's like coming backstage and go, oh, this is what we're doing. This is how it works. Yeah. So fascinating. All right. So Lumen wasn't first. But Lumen was your first. You're the full cartoonist. Okay. Yeah. And the funny thing with Lumen for me was the initial idea was closer to Attaboy, in that I've had for years, like, oh, I love old video game manuals. I think the manual for Zelda had some beautiful artwork and it had really cool story elements. I was like, oh man, it'd be really cool to do like a manual for a game that doesn't exist. And I had this kind of just a decorative concept, and I was like, oh, Lumen. I started thinking of like my own idea for a game, and it became Lumen. And then more and more I realized my lesson for Augmented Fourth was like, well, with Lumen, I don't think for my first big comic all by myself, going with this whole like really high concept thing, I think I need to learn how to do comic book first, like a regular comic book. And I think the story doesn't need any of that stuff to really make it work. Like, there's enough here. This is just a cool story. Like, let's just do a comic book. So I drew like, I think 6 pages or 8 pages of a little sequence, kind of a Looney Tunes Roadrunner sequence in a lot of ways. And I was like, oh, this is great. This is fun. Like, I can do this. And then I just did the rest of the first issue, and I was like, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to do like 4 issues and see what happens.
Right.
And the real first idea was like, I was reading Copra a lot. I was like, okay, I'll do like 4 issues, take a couple months off, and do 4 more issues, and just keep doing like an ongoing series. After doing the first 4 issues, I was like, I want to do something else.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to Lumen, but I think I got to do something else to kind of get this out of my system.
I gotcha. So you plan on going to Lumen, back to Lumen at some point?
That's going to be probably the next big thing, and I'm really excited because like I figured out, I was like, okay, I want to go back to Lumen. It's been a long time now. I want to do, if Lumen is Mad Max, I want to do the Lumen Road Warrior. I want to do, or Lumen Evil Dead 2. In a way, it's not a remake, but it's kind of, it goes on some things, but it's bigger, it's better, it's more well executed. And so it's going to be called Destroying Angel Lumen. And it features this character I posted online, people seem to really dig. It's called Destroying Angel, and he's like this, like he looks almost like the sinewy armor from Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay.
And with like almost like the what's his name from Legend,
The
Tim
Darkness.
Curry. Yeah, Darkness. Yeah. So that kind of thing, but robotic feel. And he's like this. He's like the new adversary for Esteban from Lumen. And I got the story worked out, and I think it's gonna rock. And like, but the thing is, I'm gonna do this, and it's gonna be next year. It will be at some point.
Right.
But I'm gonna take a quick break because after Serious Creatures, so like it's been going like nonstop for I guess like 6 years or something now.
Yeah. Well, so that begs the question: how quick do you work on comic work?
I think I work pretty quick, but I will say, I think Serious Creatures issue 2 is when my child was born, and things have slowed down. I still go pretty quickly, but I have a full-time job, and so I think I can. The pace now is basically I do a page a day, and that means complete page. I pencil it, I ink it, I color it, and I letter it. And I usually get like 4 pages or 5 pages done a week. Wow. And every once in a while, if I crank in, it becomes 6 or 7. But that hasn't been the case for a few months. And so it depends on the book too. Like for instance, Lumen is a lot faster because Lumen there's parts of Lumen where there's like 12 pages, no dialogue, and it's just full-on action. It's very abstract, and that was easy to crank out. But then like Serious Creatures is very wordy, and I'm drawing relatively, at least for me, a real world. So there's things like I gotta draw a car. Let's look up a cool car to figure out how to draw. And whereas Lumen, I'm like, okay, it's just this insane weird landscape. I can just kind of wing this, you know?
Right.
So that's a little faster for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But and I think also too, as I'm getting older, I am trying to become a better cartoonist, so I think I'm spending a little more time on backgrounds and things like that, which I should be. But I think the initial phase is like Jay Lee, early 90s. It's like, it's a silhouette. I don't care. Let's go.
Right. Yeah, I can see that too, actually. With not that it's poor in any way, but the Jay Lee, like, oh yeah, let's do what he's doing. Like, just fast.
Yeah, he poisoned me. He had a Wizard interview when he was younger, and he's like, "Yeah, I do like 7-8 pages a day." Or so. I was like, "What? Like, that's what you do?"
That's insane.
And of course, yeah, and he's like 21 years old. He's getting paid professionally to do this. That's all he has to do. So I got that hardwired into my brain, and I love Jack Kirby too. Jack Kirby's like whipping it out, and I realized, well, there's a difference. I am a grown man with a job. I also am. Those guys are, Jay Lee is inking and penciling it, but Jack Kirby's just penciling it. I'm doing everything. It's slow down. And I realized too, I remember Ed Piskor had a thing on Cartoonist Kayfabe a long time ago talking about, he used to do like, sometimes like all-nighters where he'd like do a bunch of pages. He's like, eventually a week later or something like that, I'd need to sleep a day to recover as I get older. I was like, that's right. And he's like, Todd McFarlane's thing about do a page a day is really a good, just like a goal. Just if you do more, great, but just get a page done. It will accumulate, and then by the end of the month, you probably will have a comic.
Come back next week where we get into Tony's Friday the 13th bootleg and then unpack his epic comic series, Serious Creatures. See you then.